Have you ever been in a position where you had to make a lot of progress on a piece of music in one day? Maybe your lesson's tomorrow and you forgot to practice for it. Or maybe your recital's tomorrow and you need to shore up a couple lines. Or maybe you're just really busy and you don't have a lot of time to prepare for that upcoming audition. So how much progress is actually possible to make in one day, or just one practice session? Obviously that can depend on a lot of factors, like the length of the piece and your own ability as a player, as well as the difficulty of the piece. However, by using a certain process, you can be sure to maximize your time and efficiency to make as much progress as you possibly can. To get the most efficiency and to get the most out of the time you have available, you should come up with a well-defined process before you begin. The piece that I chose to demonstrate this process is the second bourrée from the bourrées of the third cello suite. On the bass, this piece is normally played in G major, and I've played that version many times. I have a video of a recording of it on my channel. However, for an upcoming audition that I'm taking, this piece was requested in C major, the original cello key, which is a little strange for an audition. Some things carry over between these keys, such as some of the bowings, so I'll admit I'm not a complete beginner when it comes to this piece and in this key, but I haven't done any previous practice in C major. I've used another process for the first bourrée of this movement, and I was curious to see if it was possible for me to learn this entire movement, or this entire part of the movement, in one day. Here's the process that we'll use. To try and be as efficient as possible, most of the practicing is going to be done at tempo, which will be quarter note equal 120. We will also have a tuning drone going through my headphones the entire time to help solidify the intonation. We're going to be chunk practicing from the beginning, and the chunks will be defined by each bow change. So every time the bow changes direction, that's a new chunk. Sometimes that can be just one note, and sometimes it can be up to 4 notes. We're going to aim to complete these chunks 8 times in a row before moving on to the next chunk. After we've played through a chunk successfully 8 times, we're going to add another chunk on and play those 2 chunks together 8 times in a row. Once we've been able to do that, we'll drop the first chunk and add a new chunk. We'll also have various other markers throughout the piece, such as sections. The sections will be defined by the music. Where there are natural breaks in the music, that's where a new section will begin. This will be the main way we move through the piece. When this process doesn't work, if we run into difficulties getting a particular chunk to stick, we will reduce the chunk to hone in on the problems. So if the chunk is multiple notes long and we're having an intonation problem in the middle of the chunk, we're going to reduce it down to maybe 2 notes at a time, or maybe 1 note at a time. If we're still having problems at this point, then we're going to move into slow practice and separate bow practice. Slow practice is excellent, and you'll learn so much by practicing slowly. The issue is if you're in a time crunch, slow practice is slow, right? So this is what we want to do kind of as a last resort. At the end of the day, or the end of the practice session, we'll record a full run of the second bourrée and see what the improvement looks like. I don't expect it to be perfect at this point, but I expect to see some serious improvement. The entire practice session was about 2.5 hours. What I'm going to do is, as we move through, I'll highlight a couple things that I want you to look at, and then we're going to speed through most of the repetitions so you don't get stuck watching a 2.5 hour video of me practicing. The first chunk that we have is the pickup C, D, and then E flat. It's important to set a fingering before you start doing repetitions. It's okay to change a fingering while you're going through the piece, but you don't want to be playing the wrong fingering repeatedly over and over and over. And if you do happen to change a fingering, it's important to make sure that you play that new fingering more times correctly than you played the previous fingering incorrectly. This is just to reinforce to your muscles and to your brain that this new fingering is the correct fingering. This same rule applies to bowings as well. Here we added chunk 2 and 3. So we continue to move through this first section in a similar manner, adding one chunk, two chunks, depending on the lengths of the chunks, until we get to the end of the section. At the end of every section, I like to run through that section just to make sure that I actually got it all under my fingers. Here I'm messing around with a couple different fingering options. I didn't really have one prepared before I started the session, so I'm going through the various options. But as I said previously, once I decide on something, I want to make sure that that gets repeated more than the number of times that I did it incorrectly. Here we have another section run through of measure 9, 10, 11, and 12. and then another section run through of 13 through 16. At this point, we've come to the end of the piece. So what that means is that I've successfully ran through all of the chunks at least 8 times with the chunk next to it. And it also means that I've run through all of the sections individually, but I haven't run through all the sections together in a row. And I haven't actually played through the entire piece yet. So this is my first attempt to actually run through the entire piece. And this is the test where we'll see what work we still need to do. Odds are some things are going to break down. It's not going to go perfectly the first time. So we ran into 2 main issues. The first is that some of the sections just weren't learned well enough. They weren't imprinted into my muscle memory well enough. So we'll have to go back over those sections again. And then the other thing is the connection of each of the sections. Some of them came together and won't need any more additional practice, but there was a few where it was clear that my brain knew one section and my brain knew the next section, but I couldn't connect them yet. So what we'll have to do is practice the end of one section and together with the beginning of another section so that we can get that transition flawlessly. After a lot more repeated section work and connecting the sections work, this is the first time I was able to get through the piece without any serious hesitations. There was still one in there, but we're going to continue working on the same process and try to iron out those last kinks. So this one was the first time that I was able to get through the piece without any hesitations. So now what I want to do for the rest of my practice session is repeat the entire movement until getting it right no longer feels like a big deal. I can tell towards the end of this one that I was getting tense because I just wanted to get it right. This is obviously not a habit that we want to reinforce, so our work here isn't done yet. We need to practice it until it feels good, not just sounds good. And we need to practice it so that the probability of us getting notes wrong goes down. After another half an hour or so of repeating the movement over and over, as well as taking breaks, I was able to get through the movement and feel good and not feel tense. We ended up coming up with a final product that was note perfect. All the notes are there, the rhythms are there, and I no longer feel tense about playing it. And I also have memorized the whole thing. So what have I actually accomplished here? Well, I've gone from not being able to play this piece at all to being able to run through it at full speed. And I can play all the notes. Does that mean that I actually learned this piece completely? No, it doesn't. There's still a lot of work to be done, and there's still a lot of details to be hammered out. There's still things to focus on, such as small intonation consistencies, phrasing, timing, and then as well as putting it together with the first half of this movement. This piece is not audition ready after one day. This piece is not recital ready after one day. However, I did probably take it from 0 to 75% in 2.5 hours. The next steps of refining this piece would be a lot of self-recording and playing it for other people to get other people's opinion on it. So even though that this isn't performance ready, if I had a lesson on this tomorrow and I went from not being able to play it at all to that, I wouldn't be embarrassed to take that to my lesson. Or if I had a recital coming up in a week and I repeated this process 3 or 4 times in a week, I would feel comfortable playing this piece by next week. So hopefully you can use this process or another process similar to it to help you learn music more quickly and thoroughly. As stated earlier, this process isn't perfect and it's not exactly ideal, but it is very efficient in a time crunch. I think the absolute best way to learn a piece is to first listen to it and become familiar with it, and then play long tones on every single note to solidify your intonation, and then begin by practicing it at half tempo, and then every day moving the tempo up 1 click until you get to full tempo, and then chunk practicing it, and then running through it, and then recording it, and then playing it for other people. And only after all of that is it really the best that it can be. But this process will get you 80% of the way there in about 20% of the time. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this helpful, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments.